Yeah. You just sat there for 15 minutes. You just sat there. I mean, that person has been. I feel like that's that. But on the other hand, but that person might have felt like, well, I submitted, you're done. You know, it's for you to go in and check one box. That's all you do to check.
So they're saying, yeah, we'll work with you. And insofar as, I'm just trying to understand, so insofar as like, research works, right, you can do that. I probably would start you. Is there any future, is there any person this week you're doing research? You're in Dexter?
We'll spread out.
No. We're all the same.
It is, I think if you go how long have you been in the orchestra? Yeah.
Right about 19. 20 years ago. Oh.
Here's my cup.
Where's my cup?
I don't remember your name.
That's nice.
Have you guys attended this?
Silent. Oh, there are lots of legitimate concerns.
It's kind of okay, sure, let's
You're all about data and you're to yourself? And I presumably they convinced him just to take it. But that's not it.
That's all.
And I didn't realize it was the same one. So when she walked in, you were like, I was like, wait a second. So she came up.
Yeah. Cool, man. There's one guy, I recognize her from another guy who did not. Yeah.
She's the lady
Teaching or not, your kids are, yeah, it's like you don't know.
Tell me.
Come on over. That's right. I'll talk about everybody. It's okay. It's okay. This will be fine.
You can sit with us.
What can I crop him in? So we don't do that to people. So you'll see. It's fine. Come on over here. No, you just think so. It's right. It's okay.
So that's
Just feels too.
you are. Like, sit right up.
How about you?
Yeah. That's good.
Oh,
Merve is
Are we from? No, we're from Ann Arbor. He's a tourist.
Fantastic.
He's an alum of U of M, but School for Environment and Sustainability. I didn't know that was what they called it.
Okay, so let's get started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Jing Liu. I am the Executive Director of the Michigan Institute for Data and AI in Society, who is hosting today's lecture and this whole lecture series together with the School of Environment and Sustainability. So this is our first lecture of this school year. But before I introduce the speaker, I want to just say a few words about who we are, the Michigan Institute for Data and AI in Society, or we call it MIDAS. And we are a university-wide organization to support the development and application of data science and artificial intelligence methods in a variety of research fields for both scientific impact and societal impact. So very briefly, we have been around for about 10 years, and we support research, we train faculty and students, and we also build collaboration widely with public and private sectors. But these days, I would say our focus areas can be described basically by, first of all, enabling the adoption of AI and data science methods in research. And second, going hand in hand with that to ensure the responsible and ethical use of data and AI. And then third, imagining the future of scientific research and building collaboration across sectors for a future that we would like to see. And so this lecture series, we started this about really less than a year ago, and we have almost monthly, but sometimes more frequently. And this is open to the public, and audience members don't need to have any technical background. We want to use this lecture series to really highlight some of the key benefits and also considerations when we adopt AI as a new technology, how this technology is shaping the society and shaping lives, and how we together as individuals and as a community should think about how we adopt AI and how we want AI to play a role for us. And so later this semester, there will be 4 other speakers, and I really hope to see many of you in these lectures as well. And you can see their research areas range quite widely. From using AI. Jason Corso will talk about using AI to develop health assistance for rural communities. And Barbara McQuaid is going to talk about AI and misinformation. And P. Anandan will talk about AI and its impact on the global south. And also, Moshraf Chaudhary will talk about AI and energy. So, also, I want to mention that our main event this year, or the biggest data science and AI event this year at the university, is going to be this Data Science and AI Summit, which will happen in November. All are welcome. And we are featuring a few very prominent speakers for this summit, including I just want to say a couple. Ashley Lawrence, who is the CVP and Managing Director of Microsoft Research, and Andy Connolly, who is one of the lead scientists of the Vera Rubin telescope project, which some of you might know is really the most massive astronomy project ever in history. And so hope to see some of you there. So for today's speaker, we have Merve Hickok. And so Merve is a prominent figure in the space of AI policy, regulation, and governance. At the University of Michigan, she is the responsible data and AI advisor for my organization and also affiliate faculty member in the School of Information. But this is actually a very small part of her work. On the national and international stage, she is the founder of AIethicist.org and the president and policy director at the Center for AI and Digital Policy. Her work spans research training, advocacy, advising, and consultation for governments and nonprofit organizations. So she trains government officials on the responsible AI deployment, and she also advises in international organizations, including European Commission, UNESCO, the Council of Europe, OECD, and the government of Japan. And she also advises the U.S. Congress and multiple U.S. states and cities. So she really is one of the most qualified people to talk about this AI regulation. And so we're very excited to have her here today.
Can you hear me all right? I can just leave with that introduction, and I'll be the winner of the day. But let me start with as soon as this comes up. As Ying mentioned, that a lot of my work in both in the US and internationally is working on AI policy and regulations in a way that advances human rights, democratic values, and rule of law. It just got a bit harder, as you might imagine, but it wasn't easy to start with either. We've been engaged in these conversations for more than a decade now, before the word AI was sexy, and I think the dam doors were just opened and flooded us with even more concerns about generative AI as well. So since then, we actually have been doubling down on our engagement with the governments, with international organizations, state level, federal level, as well as multinational level, on how to engage with AI policy, how to advance democratic values and human rights, consumer rights, and have seen very different approaches to this conversation and to these questions that we're going to tackle today. But for the benefit of time and for hopefully your interest, I will focus mainly on the US pieces, although I will mention some of the international ones. But before I start, I kind of want to flip these questions of the night to you and ask, should we regulate AI? Maybe if yes, if you think that we should, maybe raise your hands. All right, anyone who thinks we should not regulate AI? Okay, slight minority. But we'll come to that. Why should we regulate AI? And this time, for those of you who had answered yes to whether we should regulate it or not, can you just give me a few examples of why, what your reasoning is? Why are we regulating AI, or why should we? Just throw it in.
Potential harms that it causes, we need guardrails to prevent harm.
One, thank you for that.
It is a rhetoric machine, not a logic machine, so we don't have any bearing, and it doesn't know what truth is. So there should be some regulation to be able to identify what is truth.
For misinformation, disinformation. Okay.
We need to make sure that the data it's trained on is equitable for the population it's going to be delivered to.
Okay. And if it wasn't equitable, what would that mean?
So make sure that for example, the data needs to represent an entire population, not just like a segment of a population, and then you employ it into a population that it doesn't represent, then the output is going to be not suitable for example,
So it might create biased
yeah.
results and adverse impact. Okay. One more?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these tools are, I guess, open source, so it's available to people. People can use it according to their convenience, but sometimes it can be really good or extremely bad, so it can go either way.
Okay. So it's a tool that's very much dependent on how we use it, whether we decide to use it or how we use it, and the outcomes. All right, one last one.
Tools and transparency. Tools and transparency, so we know what it's doing behind the scenes. So if it draws a conclusion or gives you a result, you know why it came to that.
So we should regulate the explainability side and like how those decisions were made and how the outcomes were reached. Okay, how should we regulate it then? So we know the concerns, so this is just a few of the concerns, but how should we regulate? All right, well, let me kick off with the conversation then. So why do we care, right? So that was one of the questions here, and some of you have touched on the bits and pieces of these concerns. So I want to split this between individuals and society, as well as consumers and businesses, because there are legitimate reasons why we are concerned about AI and impact of AI, both on individuals, marginalized groups, society at large, security, but also we shouldn't forget about the smaller and medium-sized businesses and the consumers. So for individuals and society side, we're looking at impact on human rights, right? So you mentioned biased decisions and possibly adverse impact, adverse decisions. With those outcomes, we might undermine we might discriminate against someone and undermine equality. We might infringe upon someone's in privacy, right, by the amount of data collected or data collection practices. We might also, those biased decisions or negative outcomes, incorrect outcomes might also mean that someone is not going to access the resources or opportunities that they should, whether that is access to government benefits or admissions to a school or being recruited by a company or their credit loan, etc., being accepted. So there's significant impact on access to resources and opportunities as well. We also have concerns on impact of AI on due process and rule of law, especially when we have automated the systems that might be used in courts to determine if someone should be let on parole or not, whether like how long their sentence should be, how much they should be fined. It might be systems that are assessing the risk of refugees, asylum seekers, or migrants in general. And it might create this black box. We mentioned we want to know how those decisions are made. If you don't know the decision, how those decisions are made, and what kind of criteria was used in these decisions, whether that is according to the law or rule of law, we might also undermine due process and rule of law and access to justice, fair trial and justice as well. But also, one of our bigger concerns, especially for my organization, Center for AI and Digital Policy, is democratic values. And by democratic values, we mean free media, free elections, fair elections, protection of minorities but protection of minorities by the majority, and access to resources in general, and access to information by the public so you can make informed decisions. So things like misinformation and disinformation, or being able to manipulate people and their political leanings, or use their own political leanings and interest to push them towards a certain direction, that has big implications on democratic values. And it's not new. It's not something new. We have seen the impact of that with social media algorithms, especially over the last decade and a half. We know the echo chambers. We know the implications. But AI, especially generative AI, brings even further concerns around that, because you can impact people en masse by individually tailored messages and data collection. And now, final piece, this is not an all exclusive, not exclusive, but a full list. But the stuff that are most important, I would say, for individuals and society is environmental impact. You might hear the impact of data centers on energy grids or water resources across the country, very close to home. I think we're going to have more of these conversations in Ann Arbor and Ipsy in the coming days. But there is a concern that is not only in this region or in the US at large, but across the world, whether that is the waste that it creates, the pollution it creates, or the resources it is pulling, and people want more transparency. And the regulations, the reason we are discussing regulations across all of these concerns for individuals and society is there's significant power, knowledge, and resource asymmetry between you or me as an individual versus a big corporation, or between me and the government who's using or who's deciding these to use these AI systems. So we need to have some sort of method or a way to kind of balance that or level that field and have more power or less power imbalance and more access to these decision-making methods and mechanisms. When we switch over to consumers and businesses, so as you individuals, you're not only wearing one hat, right? So you're not only like faculty, you're not only your like professional hat, your parents, your siblings, your neighbors, your consumers, your citizens. So whichever hat that you might be wearing or concerned at any particular time, you are being impacted by AI in different ways. So if we switch over to consumers, or you might be a business owner, what does AI mean in terms of its impact and within the bigger question of regulations or whether we should regulate or not? These systems might undermine safety if they're not designed, tested, and deployed in a responsible way, or by prioritizing safety and security, which might create product safety and product liability issues, just as your car will be, or any other, for example, appliance or tool that you're using. We might have deceptive business practices because the mainstream consumers are not necessarily knowledgeable about AI and how it works, etc. Some vendors, and there are a lot of them out there saying, our AI system can do A, B, C with such and such accuracy, and just claim that their AI system is this phenomenal tool that is going to solve all of your business problems or your individual problems. And we don't necessarily have a way to get more information or counter those deceptive claims. It might create anti-competitive behavior, right? So right now we're seeing only a handful of companies who are at the leading edge of this, getting more and more investment and like funding, which might eventually create more monopolies. It might create, we're already discussing copyright infringements, right? So you might be a creator, you might be earning your business, or you might be earning your life with the stuff that you create, whether it's writing, art, whatever it is. But then a company comes and sweeps and scrapes everything that you have built, and then makes money out of it while your rights, your copyrights are undermined. But also we want to have, if you're a small or medium business who wants to use AI, you want to be able to assess the risks. You want to be able to assess the claims the vendor is making. And without some of these regulatory mandates, like I said, there is a significant power and knowledge asymmetry between a small business and these big companies, right? So it creates this, again, even in the business sense, put aside your human rights, your civil rights, your consumer rights, etc. Even at a business-to-business level, there's significant imbalances and asymmetries again. So how does AI governance help with this, and why are we even talking about regulation? Is we think about AI governance as like a spectrum of things, right? It cannot be just legally binding. It cannot be just voluntary commitments that a company says, I'm going to do X, Y, and Z. So we have a bunch of governance methods that are either initiated by the governments, set by the governments, or initiated by the industry because of consumer demands, because of pressures, etc. And I'm not going to go into the details, all of the detail of all of these, because we want to focus more on the legislation and regulatory pieces today. But just to give you a bigger picture is whether it's national or international, whether it is legally enforced, like legally binding versus not, there is a spectrum of things that we are working or advising companies and governments that can be put in place. So it's not a black and white thing, or it is not only regulate or not regulate. It's not that clear cut. And it really depends on the case as well. So what we've been doing over, like I said, over the last decade or so is we have engaged with a number of international government organizations on formulation of some of the principles of trustworthy AI or responsible AI, right? So whether it was OECD, UNESCO, or G7, G20, these were the governments coming together at an international level and saying, hey, before we do anything in, like at state level or country level, we need to establish this international governance collaboration. And we need to establish some principles and methods to do this, because AI is a borderless technology, right? So it doesn't matter if European Union is governing it only, or if United States is regulating it only. It needs to be a collaborative effort, because I can deploy an AI system today, and my next customer might be in Philippines, in Japan, in Australia, or Mexico. I cannot really control that. So this was I would say this first 5 years or so were more on the establishment of principles and voluntary commitments and voluntary non-binding governance methods. The last 5 years or so has been slightly different, believe it or not, where the government said, okay, there are certain things that we should look to regulate. One, to protect the consumer and individual rights, human rights and consumer rights, but also the safety of individuals and communities. So one of the first to start all this was European Union, and it took them about roughly 6 to 7 years from starting the initial conversations and setting out that we're going to regulate AI to last year when the EU AI Act was adopted. So it was a very comprehensive, horizontal, cover everything that AI touches kind of regulation. There is now an international treaty on AI that was drafted and adopted by Council of Europe. And for those of you who might not be familiar with this organization's Council of Europe is actually European Union plus 20 more countries. United States is an observer country to this. In the United States, over different administrations, starting with Obama, Trump, Biden, Trump, we've seen a number of executive orders and memorandum trying to regulate, or not regulate, but put some guardrails or some framework around this. And then we've also seen China and Japan looking as the first movers to regulate this. In fact, China has multiple AI regulations right now focused on explainability and transparency. Japan is doing something very different that is focused on not more relevant to their business culture that would allow innovation, but in a trustworthy manner. So like I said, the first 5 years of these conversations were establishing the principles. And the last 5 years of it, I would say, having a convergence on the need to govern the harmful impacts of this. Because you're right, you mentioned a number of them, I just mentioned a number of them. The harms are real as well as the benefits. And then there's also growing convergence on bans on certain AI systems. So again, not going to go into all the details here, but hit me up after the talk if you want more details. There are certain AI systems, whether because they are pseudoscientific, that they have absolutely no scientific validity, or because they undermine human rights and fundamental rights in such a critical way that there is no reversibility, etc., that some organizations have banned them altogether. European Union AI Act is one of them, but we are seeing other examples from UNESCO, as well as Brazil right now. So that brings me to the question of, is AI regulated? Should we regulate AI, and how? I would argue that AI actually is regulated, mostly, because we have existing laws that are like for civil rights, equality, non-discrimination. We have, not in this country, but in states and other countries, we have data protection and privacy regulations. We have consumer protections. So agencies, independent agencies like the Federal Trade Commission can make a decision about unfair and deceptive practices. We have product safety regulation or legislation that regulates the medical devices that you might be using, or the toys or the cars that we're driving, right? Or we have sectoral legislation like credit, access to credit, insurance, housing, etc., that requires non-discrimination, whatever. So just because you're using, if it's discriminatory, if it's illegal to make a discriminatory decision without the use of AI, it is definitely discriminatory to make that decision with the use of AI. Just because you're using a certain technology or a tool doesn't change the fact that the outcomes might be discriminatory, undermining your privacy or your consumer rights, etc. So there's that element of it, right? The existing regulations, existing legislation, the court systems, the precedents that the courts provide, as well as the decisions from the regulatory agencies do legislate this. Last year, April 2024, we actually had 6 of the federal agencies joining Department of Justice in ensuring that they are going to take regulation, they're going to apply the existing regulations such as civil rights like Title VII or trade protections, etc., to artificial intelligence. Then we have Federal Trade Commission, who has published guidance after guidance after guidance, and so far has agreed to had consent decrees or penalties for almost a dozen companies. So Federal Trade Commission in that sense is extremely active. But they are looking at like how do vendors, like what kind of claims do vendors make? Are they truthful? Does it undermine consumer trust? Are you making suspicious marketing claims or deceptive practices about what your product can do, what your AI product can do, and just like manipulating consumers, etc. So FTC has made incredible advance in this, and even in this administration. So this slide behind me was extremely timely. It arrived in my inbox just 3 hours ago. So I promptly added it because you will notice at the top is my organization's name. So there was a vendor called Workato, which claimed that their AI tool could detect AI plagiarism or AI-generated content with 90% accuracy. FTC started an investigation. My organization and a few other organizations submitted extensive expert information to kind of help them with their decision. And then they came to a ruling where they're going to require Workato to submit all of theirs, like that they had deceptive practices, they deceived the consumers. So one of the things that the organization or the vendor is going to do is send an email saying to all of their clients saying, hey, remember we told you we had 90% accuracy in detection? No, actually we don't have anything to evidence towards that or to like back up our claims. And then there's a bunch of things that they're going to have to do. But this is yet another, the most recent example that I can give that the existing regulations and legislations and existing authorities also work. Securities Exchange Commission, similar things that FTC does, but in the securities and exchange, so like stocks, derivatives, etc. They can do the same things with the vendors or companies that fall under that category. Federal Communications, FCC, can and did make a decision on AI. This was especially around election time, where they actually banned the use of AI in robocalls. Because if you remember, like, there were some robocalls that was cloning President Biden's voice at the time. And then there's a lot of conversations being mentioned. Our engagement with, or like our testimony or engagement with Congress and other countries is like how to answer this question of, should we regulate AI? How do we regulate AI? How do we go about actually implementing this? So one thing, I had this question back in March 2023, and the bigger question was, is US ready for AI revolution? And this was the first congressional hearing on this conversation, which kind of opened up the floodgates. And my suggestion there was, no, we don't have the guardrails in place for what is to come. And I'll explain what that means in the time frame. The laws that we need, public education, or the expertise in government to manage the consequences of the rapid changes that are now taking in place. So you might say, like, that kind of conflicts with what you just said, that we have laws, right? Not necessarily, because this was the point in time that was ChatGPT was deployed. It was 2 weeks before the deployment of GPT-4, and we knew what was going to come very soon and what the impact is going to be. And there are a lot of concerns and a lot of additional complications or challenges that we now face, especially with generative AI, that we don't have a proper response. So that was my concern. And what would those be? So transparency disclosures, we mentioned one of those right at the very beginning. We want to know, like, how decisions were made, but I'm going to go into details, but transparency is one. Environmental impact is another one, where we don't have any mandate, city, state, federal level, any mandate for companies to disclose or for the governments to disclose some of this environmental impact information. There are certain cases, just like criminal justice, that we might want to have human oversight. So AI is not the last decision maker in that process, that as a human we have some remedy or option to remedy. And then there's a lot of synthetic media concerns as well. So what are those, like, where is the current regulations falling short, both in the US and around the world, is things like bias testing and disclosures of the results, right? You mentioned at the very beginning that some like AI systems, if not tested and deployed responsibly, might bias against certain groups. That might impact your, like I said, the way that you're employed, whether you can get a credit, how your mortgage is valued, whether a hospital is going to, or a doctor is going to prioritize you over other patients, etc. So we want regulations to mandate at least those bias testings and, where possible, disclosures on those critical, not every AI system, but those used in critical context. And New York City actually passed a regulation on that. We might want disclosures on the training data, the provenance of the training data, right? Is this training data representative of the context where that AI is deployed? Or does it include copyright, etc.? So on the first one, California now has a regulation, have a legislation, that they mandate the AI developers to disclose the training data, the provenance of the training data. Where do you get it? EU AI Act has a similar mandate. And then EU AI Act also has a similar mandate on copyright. So it's going to get really interesting in once that comes into effect and there we start seeing enforcement activities. We might want pre and post risk assessment and mitigations this is actually a good data science or good AI practice, something that we should not be regulating or mandating. The companies should do that themselves. But nevertheless, we don't have any legislative response to that. And that goes with training, testing, evaluation method. How did a company deploy these products? Like, how did they make the decision to deploy these products? And who made those decisions? How did they develop these systems? We might have access to incidents, right? And we might want this for different reasons. So as an individual, you might say, I want to know what is the bigger impact of AI as a consumer, as an individual. Or you might, as a small business, you might say, I want to see these incidents, so I'm not replicating, or I'm more cautious about buying this AI system. Or, like I said, on the environmental piece, we might want to see the energy and water impact on the localities where data centers are built. Currently, like I said, there is no mandate that would require the companies to disclose this information. And a lot of the time what you ask, if you submit a FOIA request, let's say to your town, city, or state level, saying I want information on how the decision was made about this data center, you get this paper from the city or from the administration with everything redacted, because the companies can claim that it's proprietary information that we as citizens should not have access to, although it impacts you as citizens or residents. I mentioned another piece, right? Human oversight. That doesn't necessarily have a correspondent legislation. We want humans to be ultimately behind every single decision, whether that decision is automated, because we make the decisions to apply AI to a problem, to design AI in a certain way, to deploy that in a certain way, and to accept its outcomes. We can change that process. We can say that, make a recommendation, and it's going to be a human at the end. Or we can say everything is automated, but you might have access, you might request a revisit of that decision, etc. But in none of these considerations on human oversight is there a regulatory or legislative mandate that provides us that information, right? Even due process and rule of law requirements sometimes fall short. And then finally, I would say in the synthetic media, what has generative AI, general purpose AI systems introduced us to, I would say they amplified disinformation. Disinformation has been around since humans were around, was amplified further by social media, and then generative AI just took it to a new level. We don't have legislations, except one, I'll mention that later, about deepfakes of non-consensual explicit consent. And that is a huge problem, not only in the US, but across the board. Asia, Europe, Latin America, Africa, 95% of all deepfakes are about non-consensual pornographic images or videos of women or girls. But they don't have any way to protect themselves or hold others accountable. So we see financial fraud now that is using image, video, or voice cloning that is creating either like fraudulent activities or deceptive activities or reputational sabotage. We see mental health and companion AI that has some benefits, but also have significant negative impact if not deployed responsibly. That goes hand in hand with child safety issues. We don't have protections. We've been talking about child safety, online child safety, or child safety legislation, federal legislation in this country for ages. Still haven't passed anything. And we might have other things such as like generated customer reviews, false evidence that are more sectoral that we don't have a response to. So big loop, should we regulate AI? Yes. how should we regulate AI for critical use cases? Not everything, but high impact, high risk, critical use cases. Why should we regulate? Because there's significant impact on humans, groups, society at large, environments, businesses, and our democracy with a bigger picture. How should we regulate? It is not Wild West as you might think. Like I said, there are a lot of existing legislations, existing regulatory authorities, agencies, other tools that we can use. But like I mentioned, there are new challenges, a lot of new challenges that we don't have any controls or guardrails for. So we should look for a combination of governance methods, and that might be, demanding better from the companies. That might be their voluntary commitments. That might be legislative mandates, and it can be a combination of those. Because ultimately, I do like this technology. Although I'm like human rights defender, I spend most of my day in and out working on this questions. I do want this technology to be adopted where it adds value, not because it's shiny, not because someone thinks that it is inevitable, but because it adds value, where it adds value. And I don't want all these questions, all the corporate or government deployments to undermine that trust in something that we could benefit. And I think that the biggest risk that we have across all of this, setting aside the human rights, democratic values, and rule of law risks, is losing trust. And when we lose trust in these technologies, we're not going to drive adoption. Or let me rephrase more positively, as I have it on the slide. Trust, when a system works as intended, and when it adds value, we're going to want more of it, right? You're using AI systems in your personal life because it adds certain value. And that drives adoption. More people adopt it because they can get benefit out of it. And that adoption creates more investments. We're seeing the crazy amounts of funding and investment going into those products and companies right now. And that investment drives innovation and more access. So it's this circular thing that if you break the trust element at some point for one reason or another, because we haven't paid enough attention to the negative externalities or negative impact, that we're going to break this whole piece as well. So on that, I'm going to provide a couple of resources and open up to questions if we have time. First and foremost, thank you so much for being here on a Thursday afternoon. Second, as Ying mentioned, there are phenomenal resources under MIDAS that is all the time renewed, updated, and a lot of other resources that you can access. If you want more information, like individual literacy or individual access with these concepts that I just mentioned, can also, this is one product, it's like shameless plug, but trustworthy AI cards that we've been using with government officials, companies, product development teams, academics, to discuss some of these implications in a more easy way. And then there's a couple of training that you might want to access if you have a MIUMIsh email or alumni, staff, faculty, student. You can get more information about responsible generative AI, especially on that. And then if you're really, really interested in AI policy and regulation and want to move this to the next level, we have a lot of other resources that are available as well. So let me stop there and see if you have any questions. Sorry, but I didn't mean to change the way you were thinking. Please.
If you have a question, put your hand up. I'll bring a microphone to you.
Wouldn't footnoting be aiding in trust of an AI system, and that would make it easier to see whether the facts that they're making are truthful?
When you say footnoting, you mean citation of generated outcomes?
Yeah, like Complexity AI.
There is that, but there's also the element of not only, like, we've seen when the systems were first deployed, to your point, they were hallucinating citations, or they were not providing anything at all, right? So there are now systems that are trained on more like domain-specific information that you can get correct citations and footnotes, etc., references. Not all of them, but there are systems out there now. However, that doesn't mean that they are providing the critical information that you want from documents. Let's say you uploaded like 10 different academic research and say, summarize the most critical information to me. It will summarize and it will provide a citation, but whether those 5 bullet points that it provided are the most critical, or whether the AI system has interpreted them correctly, there is still room for hallucination there, because hallucinations are dependent on the architecture of the system. These are probabilistic systems, statistical systems. Most basic way to think about it is like autocomplete a sentence, at a very, very basic level. But they're, at the end of the day, statistical systems that are just predicting a next word or an image, a next pixel. But they're doing an incredible job of providing those answers. So not forgetting that statistical element, probabilistic element, but also they're not necessarily reasoning, or might not necessarily provide you with the most important information that you're looking for.
But they provide trust if I can go back and look at them.
It is definitely one element of trust. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
I don't know if this is on, but I was just wondering your thoughts as like a student here. I've actually seen AI used in like grading my own work in certain classes. Like the other day I was talking to my earth science professor, and she was saying she was using AI to like analyze handwriting and then like make it in a readable text, or like there's another application that'll actually like analyze what you're saying and determine whether or not the quality is good enough for you to get all the points. So I was just wondering what your thoughts are on that application of AI, and what are some of the possible pitfalls you see with that. So,
I would say it is context dependent, and you mentioned a few use cases, right? So if I'm trying to decipher someone's handwriting so that I can provide a better understanding of how they're responding rather than just giving 0, I would like that use case. Or if there are answers, like if I'm using AI for a multiple choice, like auto grading, yes, because it makes it efficient for both the students and the faculty to do that, right? However, if I'm using it to say, like, detect, hey, is your English good enough? Or have you written this? Or is this good enough of a response? Then I think our FTC complaint was an answer to that. We have seen, if you go back to what we submitted to FTC, there has been a number of cases where AI detected something as like a student plagiarism, but it wasn't. It was just that English was not their first language. So they were using different words than the AI system was trained on. Or they were detecting plagiarism for, what's the word? For the content, not necessarily the words used, but the content. But because they weren't able to reason about the content, and the faculty just used it, like accepted the results without that human oversight or overview, it's, again, failed many students. We have seen students who have lost their visas, like foreign students who lost their visas because they were determined to be plagiarizing. So I would say there is no like single yes or no answer to this. It's very context driven, and what the intent and motivations behind it. Please. Sorry.
I had a question. Yeah. Can we circle back to how existing laws protect us? Because I don't really agree with you on that regard. As a consumer, I don't feel protected by existing laws at all when it comes to the digital realm, especially vis-a-vis privacy. It's obviously legal for someone to take a picture of you sitting in your house, but in the digital realm, that seems to be okay. Like the whole business model of so many hardware and software companies is predicated on extracting as much information out of you as possible while they're using their services. Like Vizio, which is now owned by Walmart, Roku, they're taking screenshots of your screen every 5 seconds, right? And then 10 years ago, I think there was a case with Facebook and how Facebook allowed advertisers to target only certain races when it came to housing. And it was over, there was a whole, you probably know this better than I do, and that loophole was plugged. But I think there are still a lot of loopholes, and they're going to be exacerbated by AI. So I wonder, what do you think about all this?
Yeah, so when I said existing regulations, I mean existing regulations, right? So data privacy or data protection regulation does not exist in the US at federal level. We've been discussing it since the 80s, beginning of 70s. So there's a Government Privacy Act, or like Privacy Act of 1974, that actually regulates how government can access data and how it should be compartmentalized. And right now we're dealing with those issues because that regulation is being undermined. But outside of that, there is no federal regulation on how companies can collect, manipulate, commercialize your data. It is a different case, for example, in California or in Illinois or in European Union. So the same companies that you're talking about, or let's say any international company, has models, privacy or data collection models that are applicable to United States, clients based in the United States, versus clients or consumers based in California, versus Illinois, versus European Union. And because European Union's data protection and privacy regulation is so extensive and so robust, that there are certain categories of information that they cannot collect, they cannot use, they cannot use to make for certain decisions, and they have to provide like impact assessments, etc. So the same company, it's not because they cannot technically put guardrails around it. No, unless it's mandated that, or unless it's regulated that they cannot collect certain information, they will do. And if they will do to like as much as they possibly can. Where you put the block or that guardrail is with regulation, because there is, as you mentioned, there's significant power imbalance and asymmetry, right? I don't feel comfortable using a lot of these applications while in the United States versus while I'm in Europe or while I'm in Japan, because I have less protection here than any other country that I do work with or travel. Having said that, for example, the Facebook decision that you made, like the Facebook case that you mentioned about providing, like not using race or ethnicity as a category, but like things like zip codes or commercial like purchases, etc., as a way to determine race. They used that and they provided that data collection. Like here is a group of potential customers that I'm going to sell to you because we think that these people belong to certain ethnical or racial categories. And FTC picked up on that. FTC actually made a decision on that. That's why I'm saying, like, if it is something illegal, meaning that there's already regulation, existing regulation and legislation, we have the tools and we see the results. But things like for data privacy, like data protection or privacy, not in this country, not federally. And I would be just as concerned about my data and the amount of data that is collected about myself or any of us as you are.
Yeah, so I'm fitting this together and thinking about your assertion about trust. And generally, that's very attractive, and I think about trust and identity myself as part of what I've been trained in. I want to say there's something else going on, which is that there's a dynamic of power where some of the examples that we're talking about here are about an asymmetric power, and the powerful must trust for things to be adopted. But the people in less power are either becoming habituated because Roku is taking a snapshot of your screen and you don't have a choice. You have TV in your house, that's how it works. Or a necessity. So for instance, if I'm in a bank and I decide my AI model can decide mortgages just fine, and that's the way it is, in power, I can trust my own AI model. But you as a mortgage applicant, you need a mortgage in order to buy a house. You're going to come to me and you're going to let me do that because you need the mortgage. So habituation and need will substitute for trust. And so my question basically here is how does that work into your framework of how you're thinking about regulation? Is there a way of explicitly dealing with power, need, habituation in the way we look at regulations as a whole?
Yeah, great question, and you're spot on. I mean, we see this day in, day out for ages now, right? Like you habitually accept all the terms and conditions and click next. You don't, even if you wanted to, like it takes ages to read through all of the legalese that you cannot do anything about or edit. So we are in that situation because we don't have any, like I said, mandates to otherwise. So when we advise for like policy or regulatory responses to this, things like opt out should be the default, for example. And then if you feel comfortable to provide your data or your chats or your information to be collected, you should be opting in to that data collection. There should be transparency mandates, or at least like transparency mandates or third-party confirmation or some sort of audits to confirm that when a company says, hey, you opted out, I'm not collecting that information, that it is in fact not collected, right? So just because you opted out doesn't mean that it's not collected. So there needs to be some sort of independent validation mechanisms as well. So we advise on what those could be that would work both for the company in terms of their like IP or like commercial interest, like commercial confidentiality, but also for the consumers and their rights, and try to balance that the power issue. Try to like come up with, provide space for smaller companies that might be competitors. So in some cases, that anti-competitive behavior on monopolistic conversations come in where the agencies or the government needs to step in and respond to that anti-competitive behavior, depending on the context. But there are multiple methods, like really depending on the case that we can respond. It is a matter of having the guardrails, and it's a matter of oversight. So the other things that I haven't like really discussed is we might have all the legislation in the world, all the mandates, but if someone is not enforcing it the way that, like, for example, FTC did, or SEC did, or European data protectors do, then, okay, we have legislation, so what? I'll just like pay the fine when it comes to it, or I'll just do it until someone comes in and knocks on the door. And so legislation, like those guardrails need to go hand in hand with enforcement as well. So another piece of our advice to the governments is funding and resources to those enforcement activities. Just because we pass something in the Congress doesn't mean that everything's solved. The enforcement piece also needs to be in place.
Hi, thanks for your talk. I really appreciated it. I've been thinking a lot about the slide where you said that AI should not be used in like life and death cases. Yeah, and I'm also thinking about human oversight. And I do have a question here, but I want to explain the thing I'm worried about, and then I'll try and formulate the question. And so you mentioned AI being used in, say, law enforcement and in court decisions. And I'm aware that, there's been cases where these decisions are using to decide, how the parole conditions are for somebody who's going on parole, or whether or not somebody has to post bail, and how much based on calculated recidivism rates. And so what I'm thinking here is that, okay, so here's a tool, and it's being used in an area where rights are really important. Right to justification, right to a fair trial are really important. And it strikes me that right now, as far as I can tell, AI systems can't really give justifications that seem to matter in the case of like the kind of justification I should want if I'm, say, getting my parole conditions. And this strikes me both as not a life and death decision exactly. I mean, it's like the stakes are clearly very serious, but if it's a matter of months, it's not exactly life and death. But it also strikes me as the kind of place that maybe we ought to really not be using AI. So the question is kind of, and my worry is that human oversight, like, well, okay, as long as there's a human behind the final decision, it's sort of obfuscating the fact that, in fact, there's a really crucial missing justification happening when AI is being used in this type of decision. So the question I'm trying to build to here is like, do you have any thoughts about how we can really be carving out these cases where here's where AI shouldn't be used because it's life and death, here's where AI can be used, but it's we got to be careful and regulatory about it. And the concern is just that it strikes me that there are some cases that are not life and death that we really ought not be using them anyway. So
no, it's great question. Like whether the decision to whether you use AI in a certain context is what we call, at least in my group, like question zero. Yeah. That will be the question that you should ask first and foremost. Like just because someone claims that an AI system can do X, Y, and Z doesn't mean that it does. It doesn't mean that it should be used, even if it does. But in terms of like other use cases where AI should definitely not be used, I didn't go into too much details of this prohibited practices or bans. But things like social scoring. So this was, I would say, a scare that came out from some of the pilots that some of the regions in China, not China as a full nation, but some of the regions in China are deploying. What they're doing is you start with a certain point system as it's piloted, like I mentioned. And then every time that you do something that impacts the society or others negatively, your points are detected in theory. And then if you go below a certain threshold, that you can't travel, you can't enroll your kids to certain schools, etc., etc. So this was published or like amplified by media as like, hey, China as a whole country deployed this and they're like doing this, etc. It's not the case, and even some of the pilots have been rolled back. But what it did create was this like, hey, this is a possibility where the government can create this like unitary system, scoring system for citizens, and then use that for social engineering, social control, and manipulation, etc. So we don't want those systems, certainly not in US or in a democratic country, but nowhere in the world that has huge implications for human dignity, right? Human rights, human dignity at large. Things like biometric surveillance, so collecting any of your biometric data, the way that you talk, the way that you walk, your audio, your face, you name it, everything that goes onto biometric data, that should not be collected en masse. Like you should not be putting a camera and collecting information and all this biometric data to make decisions about citizens, right? Or their access to information, or access to resources. Secret profiling, again, goes back to that unitary scoring or secretly profiling someone and making decisions about them. Deception and manipulation, that's a questionable one in different countries because it goes into like First Amendment, freedom of speech issues, etc. So that's a whole different conversation. Biometric categorization, emotion analysis, and predictive policing, I put these three under pseudoscientific systems. One uses your biometric information, like your facial features, the way that you walk, the way that you sound, to determine whether you belong to a certain religious, political, sexual categories, sexual preferences, you name it, things that have absolutely nothing to do with your biometrics, just so someone can make a determination and say, hey, I used AI to determine this, and you're X, Y, and Z. Same thing with emotion analysis. This is a pseudoscience as far as 200, 300-year-old pseudoscience that we have unfortunate cases in slavery and Nazi experimentations. And now it's coming back as, hey, AI can look at your face again and determine what kind of emotions that you are going through and whether you're a threat to someone, to the government, to the company, whether you are risky, whether you're healthy, whether you are Democrat, Republican, and anything that you can possibly think of. Again, has nothing to do with those categories, nothing to do with your emotions, which are culturally different. It depends on your culture, your face, your physique, what kind of things that are going to your mind right at that moment. It's not something that has stays the same from one culture to another, from one person to another. But there are a lot of people, a lot of vendors that claim that you can use the biometrics to analyze emotion and make a decision about that. So, and then predictive policing is, I think the best example would be Minority Report, trying to predict someone committing a crime before they actually do. There are actually a lot of these deployed by certain police departments across the US, believe it or not, as well as other countries. But again, that goes in conflicts right against the due process, rule of law, fair trial, presumption of innocence, just to name a few things that you might find important. So all of these things are like set of bans and prohibitions that governments should think about. One thing I didn't add is little autonomous weapons. We've been having that conversation in a different fora for multiple years, like little autonomous weapons and automated target selection systems, which is a whole different conversation. But I think there's convergence, an increasing convergence from society and from different stakeholders about these prohibitions on the systems at the very least.
Hi, thanks again for the presentation. My question is, I was wondering if you can just speak to your thoughts on the ability of legislation and regulation to keep up with innovation and explosive adoption, because I think there's a paper, AI 2027, it's probably very popular, but it just illustrates the fact that we're on a kind of exponential curve of this technology. So what are your thoughts on our legislative bodies to be able to keep up with that?
First, I'll repeat what I said. We have existing things that are at very high level, things like civil rights, democratic values, consumer protection, product safety, etc. that regardless of what technology that you're using, whether you're using predictive AI, generative AI, or anything beyond, that would still be applicable because the use cases or the outcomes are subject to those legislations. So that's one thing. Second thing, I think there is also the element of legislation shouldn't necessarily shouldn't be expected to go at the same pace that innovation is. That would be kind of expecting your legislators to come up with all the use cases and imagine everything and then try to regulate that. You don't want that. So it's natural that regulation or legislation would always follow the use cases. But as long as we have those bigger guardrails, you are already setting some of those, rules of the game.
So I guess as an example, let's say you have an election and you've got some generative AI, next generation is having an impact on social media, and you've got a timetable for this election. It does happen in that. So that begs the question, can our legislation keep up with the cascade effects of this disruption?
May or may not. I don't think that we can ever have that catch up, because, like I said, it's impossible to think of all the possible use cases. Like, imagine what has happened in the last 2.5 years now, since generative AI systems became more stream. Things that even the creators, their developers, the few companies that deploy them didn't think about creating, or the use cases. So humans are very creative. I think it's impossible for legislators to play catch up with the different use cases, but that doesn't mean that they cannot regulate, and that doesn't mean that the bigger picture protections like civil rights, human rights, etc. shouldn't be protected. Oh, sorry.
So because of the way most people have interacted with AI at this point in the public, the general public, it is in things that are somewhat deceptive. Do you think we have already passed the capacity for the public to trust these technologies?
I don't. I actually prefer this situation where the public is discussing the benefits and the impacts, both the positive and the negative impacts, and trying to have a say in this, in the development, deployment, and governance of these models, versus 5 years ago, where it was only a few of us. It was very lonely. And it was the same people, literally the same people wherever you go, that would be in the same room saying the same things. And I actually, for better or worse, it really opened up the floodgates, generative AI did. But I actually am very appreciative of the fact that more people are now involved or thinking about, how is this impacting my students? How is this impacting my children? How is this impacting my elderly parents who might be benefiting from this? Might keeping themselves company with AI companions, or might be subject to fraudulent voice cloning, etc., or find really interesting activities to keep them engaged, etc. So we got so many, millions and millions more people having these discussions. And I don't think anything about this technology or the use cases is inevitable. I think, yes, some of the companies had the head start, but it doesn't mean that we cannot come to a point where consumers, society can put that pressure, more pressure for more responsible deployments and developments. So I'm actually very happy that we're having would you be would you see yourself being in the room having these conversations 4 years ago, 3 years ago?
Maybe 2 years ago, but not now. Not 3 years, 4 years ago, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we're all discussing this, right?
Hi, I'm an undergrad leading the AI Safety Club here. So I have this question.
Music to my ears when I hear this.
I saw the Center for AI Policy in DC shut down this summer. So I was wondering, what do you think is the biggest challenge for people working on AI policy right now?
Was it a nonprofit?
Yeah, it's a nonprofit, and it's since I think their lack of funding, or the big donors are going to somewhere else because of the political atmosphere. Okay. I guess.
Okay, I don't have specifics. I don't have insight to the specific of that organization. But what I would give you is how the landscape has polarized a bit and kind of shifted over the last year or so, I would say. So when we say AI safety, it includes, at least from the way that I interpret it, I teach it, discuss it, all the stuff that we think, as well as adversarial attacks, cybersecurity stuff, etc. So it is a bigger picture of how do we ensure these products are not going to undermine an individual's safety, child safety, public safety, etc. And how do we actually measure that? Like, how do you actually measure the safety of a large language model or image model, etc.? So we started those discussions, and there has been actually like AI safety institutes that were established by different countries across the world. We have an international network, and we significant funding going into both, academic research labs, nonprofits, think tanks, and some of the government organizations. But then that word safety became very politicized, and it became, in some circles, policy circles, it became almost like equivalent to regulation, hard-handed regulation. And there are a lot of people that are opposed to regulation at any cost. I suggest there are common sense, sensible regulations that should be in place for all of us. But because the word was politicized, now what we're seeing, both in the United States and across the world, is let's use AI security. Let's talk about national security, economic security, biosecurity, etc., and set aside all those other concerns about civil rights, product safety, child safety, etc. So it became, what I'm trying to say is, the word got politicized, which created this huge polarization in both academics, civil society, as well as company, like corporation side. And now people don't want to necessarily touch that word, but just because they don't want to touch that word in some circles doesn't mean that the necessity is not there. We definitely, I cannot say this enough, need to spend more energy, resources on safety to make sure that these products are deployed correctly.
Thank you so much. And a quick one, do you have any takes on AI 2027?
A lot of assumptions. There are multiple assumptions of this is where we see the trajectory going, and this is like what would happen. Some of the state actors as well as corporate actors will do. There are assumptions about how the models will scale up. I think some of those scaling, for example, scaling assumptions might be challenged with the deployment of GPT 4.5 and 5 right now, or energy constraints that are real. So I think if you're building a theory, I'm not saying that it's wrong, but it's kind of built up. The foundations of it is a lot of assumptions. So we'll see, but I don't see in 2027 at the least, put it that way.
I have a question about the gentleman's question about the pace of legislation, but I'm more interested in the pace of enforcement. So I'm a professor at the med school, but I worked with the Federal Trade Commission last year, and enforcement is pretty deliberative and slow, and the investigations are very rigorous. So that is the part of it that's both its funding and the FTC's capacity to do all those enforcement cases that I think, I'm wondering if you see any solutions to speeding up enforcement, either having a proactive, preventative approach or an approach that uses AI to be doing some of this work to see, who is actually following the regulations. And then also just a very difficult question. Do you think AI deserves First Amendment protections, like an AI product?
That's an easy question for me. Yeah. Absolutely not. Because I'll go back to what I said about like in the human oversight slide, that it is, we made at some point in this country and beyond to provide rights to corporations, right? Corporate entities and legal entities, which took out a lot of responsibility and accountability from decisions of the CEOs, investment bankers, traders, etc. And we have seen the implications of that over time, still do. AI providing First Amendment rights to AI means that a whole host of other rights can be in order. So just because like freedom of speech or First Amendment. It doesn't stay that way. So you might say, okay, AI then has ownership rights. AI has right to a fair trial. AI has this, etc. That removes all the accountability again and responsibility from the developers, deploying companies, and all their business decisions, right? So we make AI, we design AI, we decide on the training data, we design on the architectural design, how we evaluate these systems, how we deploy, how we govern. So there's a human behind all of these decisions, and giving AI a right means that you're treating that as a separate entity that is like independent from all those decisions. So that's an easy question for me. The enforcement piece is real, the issue is real, extremely real. And we advocate for more funding and more expertise. We've been advocating for that, but you might have also seen in the last executive order that came out last month was there was a specific demand that Federal Trade Commission or SEC kind of review all the investigations that they have at hand and possibly just do away with them instead of moving forward. We are very much feeling that because my organization was the first one and probably the only one that brought formal complaint against OpenAI to FTC. We did that 2 weeks after my congressional, 2 weeks after my congressional testimony, March 2023, submitted 46 pages of evidence and complaint to FTC on OpenAI, on deceptive business practices, unfair practices, etc. July 2023, FTC opened the investigation according to our complaint. And we are now, September 25? Still waiting for a decision on that enforcement and investigation activity. So the pain is real, but I think it's definitely a resource and a political will issue.
Thank you very much for the talk. What are some of those use cases that you think do add value?
Scientific discovery, definitely one. Big fan of, for example, the DeepMind's work on all the scientific discovery, protein use cases. Microsoft has just released an open source model on materials called Materials Gen, where you can simulate materials to create new materials to create things like materials that don't exist in natural form. The ability to simulate that discovery process or design process without using resources like physical resources or time, etc. You can simulate things without having to invest months and months and months of maybe wasting resources, right? So those kind of stuff, especially on the scientific discovery piece, for me is huge. Things like using AI for environmental impact, climate change, anything that has to do with disaster response. I have an app on my phone that anytime there's a small earthquake on Japan, I get a beep here because I travel back and forth a lot, and you can at real time watch the the quake expansion. And if you receive for example, notification somewhere else that is not the epicenter, you can literally see by the time it hits the circle comes to your location, you're starting to feel the shake. So those are things as they get better and better, have huge implications for disaster response and recovery, etc. So for me, those are the big cases.
Anybody else? Okay. Well, thank you so much, Merve.
I just wanted to introduce myself. My name is Aaron. I worked with KDIP last fall. I was part of the research group.
Cool.
Yeah, so
it's always great to
I'm sure as you're doing these talks, you're finding us in the wilds.
I always do. I always do across the world as well.
Yeah.
Really nice meeting you.
Yeah, it was a great presentation.
Thank you. Thanks for the question as well.
Of course.
Hello.
Hey.
I'm Aisha.
Hey Aisha, how are you?
I'm good, thank you. So I'm doing research at the UMSI on trust in AI in older adults, and I was really curious about, since you work with policy, a lot of the research that we uncovered was older adults' perception of like the regulation landscape. They basically distrust it. They don't know who to point fingers at, and I feel like as someone who's really interested in ethics and AI, I feel as a researcher I have no idea what to do and like how like you mentioned the already existing regulatory landscape, and I feel the general public doesn't know that, and what should be done.
One is like share the knowledge that you have with your community, like whether that is your colleagues or like peer students, whether that's your community, whether you're as parents, etc. Share the knowledge to increase this literacy and have those conversations, because the impact is not like only academic, right? Or it's not only commercial, it's your family, it's you as a consumer, it's you as a professional or future professional. So one is sharing that. Second is we see a lot of impact when you reach out to elected representatives. So there's a bunch of state level regulations that are way ahead of the federal regulation in the United States. And when we discuss with those state senators or legislators, they say it's because they get a lot of demands from their constituencies. So they hear that, and once it hits a certain threshold amount of like people demanding the same thing, then they start taking that serious and it becomes a priority for that. So definitely share what you know, for like beneficial stuff as well as risks, and then demand better from your elected officials.
And do you come from like a background in research or policy?
International relations, political science.
So I was wondering, like, how did you get into this?
Oh, that's a very long story. It's a very long story.
And also doing, so really curious about that too, because I know you're also a lecturer at the UMSI.
I am.
So I was curious about how to mesh policy and research, because I had someone tell me, oh, you should focus on research, we're technically not supposed to be political in a way, so I was also curious about that blend.
But you step out of the door from the school and you're a consumer, you're a citizen, you might, whatever it is, that just because you're researching something at the school doesn't necessarily mean that you shouldn't advocate for change in other ways, right?
Yeah. Thank you.
Well, nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you.
Thank you.
I have a kind of a question related to the existing mechanisms in place for regulation around a specific example. You probably have heard reports that the administration's considering using outsourced AI to develop prior authorization for Medicare procedures.
I read it last week.
Yeah. What existing mechanisms could be used to kind of put guardrails around that? Because it seems that with the incentives, like when I read, there are potentially financial incentives to the third-party companies that every time they reject, they get money. So it seems like problematic.
If they're using it for, like, one mechanism is procurement, and all the due process and transparency requirements about procurement. So if, as I understand it, the government is looking to delegate it, to your point, to a private party to do it on behalf of public sector, because it's like government benefit, right? Medicaid, Medicare. So how did they decide to make that contract with that particular vendor? How was the procurement process? Like how it was evaluated, what kind of questions they were asked, and who made the decision and how. Because the existing guardrails for that is both the federal acquisition regulation, and then second, Trump administration, the OMB just published acquisition memorandum for federal agencies. So there are minimum requirements that each agency, department and agency, needs to follow for acquisition or such contracts. So I would just turn it around and say, hey, did you? Let me see the process. Or
I'm trying to educate myself to be vocal to my representatives, etc. So I was just curious. All right.
A lot of the times it's boring stuff like procurement
No.
that has the biggest levers and can create most of those like guardrails as well.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. So, Mike Stebbing, 39 years ago, I was a freshman in this building, and it's amazing how technology and times have changed through the time. So I've been a federal employee my entire life, DoD, and there's a big mandate for us to put anything to do with AI. We can push forward to help improve any part of our office, how our office functions. And so in my case, I'm part of the group that maintains the Pentagon, literally. It's maintenance, facility engineering, so nothing with web systems, although obviously there are a lot of applications with that. And trying to figure out, because we're under some, because I own a lot of data. I have all the blueprints of the building. I do all the stuff from the renovation, all the construction documents. So we because of the renovation of the Pentagon, finished in 2012, we have a whole fresh set of how the building is now been reconstructed. And so that end is kind of public knowledge. It's just the minimum security level we keep on that. Does Michigan have an equivalent? Have you all thought about how you could use is that like a data set? I know you could meta tag it, you could then put data tags on it. We really don't know how to do that. I've got all a program called ProjectWise, and it's just the documents that get stored as they come in. But
are you looking to this for like preventive maintenance?
Yes, because we realized that I have to provide these documents to our engineers for doing future projects, and then the operation and maintenance crew really exist for them, so they can go in the middle of the night and they can find these things, and some can do this. And we have a pipe burst or whatever, they can go find the valve, they can go turn it off, I can look it up. It's kind of cool, and so we need to use it to help maintain the place. But I have all this data. For us it's a lot. It's 4.4 terabytes, and so we have 4 million documents. We think we use 300,000 of them, and so I need to sort through all the documents to figure out what we really need to keep, what's extra that can comply with the rules for how to dispose of stuff. But have you all done the same thing for the
I don't know what SI might University of Michigan might have done or not, but in terms of facility management or smart building management, I think a lot of those data, other companies or organizations are using it for like preventative maintenance or the sensor data, respond to something that before it breaks.
Yeah, we have.
But also there are some cut you in. There are some now AI systems that combine image recognition with maintenance systems.
Yeah, their Maximo program, they do that.
So you can just for example, build all the blueprints of say construction or blueprints of the final floors, etc. And you can just go around with a camera and it compares the blueprint, what it should be to what it is. So for example, your site inspection rather, is almost automated. As you're walking through, the camera picks up all the data points, and it tells you this is not per spec, or this is built wrong, or there's something wrong with this. And I've seen that used both in construction of construction or renovation. I also seen it as day-to-day maintenance.
Yeah, so LiDAR, we're going to start using that for our monthly invoicing on our construction projects to do just what you're talking about. And also, we also want to collect before the walls get closed and the ceilings get closed, and one last picture of the place to come back to actual drawings, because you never really know when they submit to your written drawings, what come digitally nowadays, if indeed things were put in vertically or not, or where they're put in. So we're thinking of doing that.
One thing I would be not concerned, but keep in mind obviously, is what you put on the cloud.
Well, so I have a contract with Amazon Web Services.
It's one thing to put commercial blueprints of the university on cloud versus putting the blueprints of Pentagon on cloud, right?
That's the question. Who do you turn to? So Amazon has billions of dollars spent on all the data centers and all different types of infrastructure they've built out there. So conceivably, it'd just be applied to us. I could do that. There are other companies I could possibly turn to that help interpret how to make this all work, how to think about it all. Because these sounds like, this is all new to me, right? It sounds like they're having to pick a model they've done and adapt it to what you might want to be able to do. So it's a fresh start in a way, which seems kind of awkward, but it could be bad. The other question we're kind of dealing with is...
I'm just mindful of time waiting as well.
But the other question that kind of dawns on me, are we in a new age of data? Because right in the past, you would get an Oracle server attached to these programs like IBM's maintenance. You'd have an Oracle server out there, and it's just a way of talking to the server.
But nowadays, are we really fighting these big companies to come up with their own fresh data centers and then a new way of sorting data?
Yeah, absolutely.
We just turn it over to them as if
I wouldn't say turn it over to them, but because they have better access to the possibilities or the ways that you can analyze stuff, they might have different ideas as well, but I wouldn't necessarily turn over data to them or like give the reins to them.
Directly, yeah, I know, it's a tough, never see it back again. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm just curious. Sorry, this is a like question. Nice job. Turkish. Thanks for being here.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Yes.
I'm just a drive.
Oh, okay. Of course.
I don't know what to do.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize you were here. I was waiting for like now.
I'll say the same thing I mentioned to you. I don't know in school sharing the best in keeping up with the changes and exposing yourself to different angles of this question.
You're not teaching this.
I'm not teaching
this. You might be in one group, but like keep your sensors on. But also share your knowledge with the people around you as well, whether that's like your peer students, your family, and other network, etc. Just get them to talk more about it. And if you're not already following Stuart Russell, definitely.
Yeah, we are doing some fellowship work, just educate humanity people from everyone. Also, just do you have any first in mind? Or
Stuart Russell.
He's the good person. Thanks so much.
And from that, you can definitely follow like the leaders like Yoshua and Chuma. Because again, it is so polarized right now that people are very much sticking to very opposite ends of what safety means. I think the ones that are trying to bring those camps together are people like Russell and NGO, etc. That I would suggest focus more on.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much. Yeah, that's amazing. And very well. And this is every lecture was spent like afterward. I mean, people just had a ton of questions. But it's great that it kind of just helped them talk.